vz.45. Just a little guy. He's just a little guy. Not very good from 10 yards out.
Welcome to the Middle Circle Mike channel. Now you may see the title and thumbnail of this video and wonder why these little guys are very important. Well, except for being cute as all hell. But in the study of CZ and Czechoslovak pistols in general, there is a definite difference between pre-war Czechoslovakia, before they were taken over by the Nazis, and post-war Czechoslovakia that were ruled by the communists. And these pistols not only represent a transition in the pistols development themselves, but they also are a good microcosm of the history of Czechoslovakia. They're split, getting back together, and being taken over by communism. And also, the developer of this little guy introduces us to someone very important in CZ history, especially for those of you who are either CZ fanboys or just worship the ground that CZ walks on. So let's get started with a little of the macro history.
The macro history of the vz.38 video left off with the German occupation of the Sudetenland, the split of Czechoslovakia into the Czech Protectorate and Slovak puppet government during World War II. One of Hitler's main desires in annexing the Sudetenland was Czech arms production, and German arms still reeled from the effect of Versailles neutering. While planned constructions of new facilities were halted after 1939, it would ramp up again after 1942. In general, there would be a pissing contest between Reichswehr Hermann Goering, RWHG, the SS, and Albert Speer's autonomous group of arms industries who were sanctioned by Hitler in the name of total war. The SS wanted to create their own, quote, SS empire, independent of the Wehrmacht and Speer. The SS would basically take over Slovakia Brno. While Speer was able to temporarily weaken the SS hold, they would regain that hold by the end of the war. Goring and his entities would end up with control of Czechoslovakia, Skoda Works, and the Explosia powder factory. Southern Below would fall under other German entities. The two main companies we're concerned with for today's videos, Czechoslovakia and Strakonics and Erskine Brod, and Franciszek Dusek and Opochno, would continue to produce their pistols under German guidance. CZ would produce the VZ-24, which would become the P-24T, the VZ-27, which would become the P-27T, and the VZ-38, which would become the P-39T, while being forced to cooperate with Walther, and they would also later produce some of the P-38s. Dusek would continue to produce their 25 ACP Duo pistol that was originally developed in 1932. So how did the Czech and Slovak people in general react to the occupation? In general, the Czechs reacted with lack of cooperation, work and transportation slowdowns, student demonstrations, and, quote, misunderstandings of occupier language. Reinhard Heydrich was appointed the Reichsprotector in 1941 and became known as the Hangman of Prague. He'd be the only high-ranking Nazi official assassinated when he was killed in the city of Lidice in May 1942. Hitler leveled the city and slaughtered all of its inhabitants. Hitler hated the Czechs as their success between the wars challenged his theories. The Munich Agreement would be repudiated in July 1942, and Edvard Beneš would be recognized as the leader of the Czechs in exile. Resistance to Slovakia would intensify into an all-out national uprising in August 1944. The Soviets promised help, but as with Warsaw, help never materialized and would be crushed by the Germans. On May 1, 1945, Czechs in Prague instigated the Prevashchiko uprising, but approaching American forces stopped due to agreements with the Soviets, who would, quote, liberate the city by rape and pillage. The Soviets would withdraw after VE Day, allowing a reconstituted Czechoslovakia. Communists would find their way into several government posts, and after deportation of ethnic Germans in 1946, the Communists would use this as an excuse for redistribution of German property, and would formally take hold after the constitutional crisis in 1948 under Clement Gottwald, ruling as a Stalin clone. This would lead to purges of ideological enemies. Action B would see many of the business class sent into labor camps, while Action K forced clergy to swear an oath of loyalty to the state. As in Poland, many who had resisted the Nazis would find themselves executed after show trials. The economy would start the communist favorite, 5-year plans. Gottwald would attend Stalin's funeral in 1953, finding himself becoming a good communist 3 days later after catching pneumonia. The collectivist economy would produce shortages, but the Czechoslovak communists would find themselves shocked into a bit of reality after the Hungarian uprising in 1956. Even though the Soviets had crushed it, the Czechoslovak government were dismayed by the thought of mobs hanging communist leaders. This would begin some liberalization in the 1960s, opening up state censorship of the press, looking into the purges in the 1950s, and allowing public redress of grievances. This would lead to the Prague Spring in 1968 and the subsequent crushing of the demonstrators by the Warsaw Pact nations. This is about as far as I will go for the macro history in this video, as there are several future Czechoslovak pistols I have yet to review, and we need to talk about the mouse guns that are subject to this video, as telling their story helps set us up for the arms makers that were left after the various reorganizations and nationalizations. While both pistols I talk about were very popular, the company of the first, Franciszek-Dusek duo, would be totally swallowed up and cease to exist after nationalization, while Czechoslovakia, who made the second pistol, the vz.45, would survive as an entity. Franciszek-Dusek had established himself as a gunsmith by 1908 in Opočno, but refused to support the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the Great War. After the war, he'd make various guns and gunsmithing supplies. In 1926, he'd purchase the remaining stock of the Praga pistol, finish them up, and sell them under the Praga name. He started importing Spanish pistols from Singer and Ideal to sell, as well as making barrels for Mars pistols, eventually selling them under the Duo name, which was an abbreviation of Dusek Opočno. The Spanish Civil War would end his importation business, and he would start producing his own pistols, which were copies of Mars pistols, which are basically a Colt 1908 or FM 1906, sans the grip safety. At first, he would market them under the Singer and Ideal names, since that's what customers recognized, but would soon start selling them as the Duo in 1938. Some pistols sold in Germany would bear the Jaga name. Dusek himself would refuse to cooperate with the Nazis, so his factory would be taken over to continue production of the pistols, around 110,000 during the war. Quality of the pistols would stay fairly high throughout the war. Franciszek would take over his factory again in 1945 and return the pistols to their pre-war quality. His factory would be nationalized and company pushed out of existence in 1948, but the pistols would continue to be produced under supervision of Czechoslovakia, CZ. They would temporarily keep the Duo name with the CZ trademark added to the slide legend. The factory would move supervisory control to Czechoslovakia Bruno, ZB, in 1950. Here, the pistols would be made under the Z name until 1956. Production would temporarily resume in Opočno in 1959, but would be moved to CZ's Uherský Brod in 1960, and would be made on and off again until 1974. All Z pistols made here will have a B prefix. Alright, let's take a little closer look at the CZ Duo. I have my Colt 1908 vest pocket here, as well as the CZ45. This started out as the Duo under Franciszek-Dusek, and it kept the Duo name even though he was kind of getting pushed out by the late 40s. This is a 1948 model. I believe this was made under the supervision of CZ, but in the early 50s it moved to the supervision of Czechoslovakia Bruno, and so it would actually have a Z mark there, the Z mark from Czechoslovakia Bruno, as opposed to the Duo. So let's go ahead and take this apart. First of all, we're going to make sure she's empty. And you actually want to leave the magazine in and pull your trigger because you do not want to disassemble this cocked. So anyway, let's go ahead and take our magazine out now that we know she isn't cocked. To get this done, you want to pull it back just a little bit. Hold your slide back, and then you do a little quarter turn with your barrel. Then you want to be careful as you let it off. You don't want springs and little bits flying all over, but you have your striker spring there, and you got your mainspring guide rod right there. And then the barrel actually does not come out, so that might be a little bit confusing. But you are field stripped for cleaning. This is a 6-round magazine as opposed to the 8-round magazine of the 45. It is striker fired. And I'm gonna go ahead and take the grips off because I want to show you something here that was done for simplification purposes. So let's see if I can get it out here. And if I have an idea, I will speed this up. Editing mic will hopefully speed this up. but you got a screw there, and then you don't want to lose this little bit here coming out of your, there's a little that you don't want to lose. So I'm going to go ahead and set these aside. But the one thing I wanted to show you is this, opposed to the early duos. The early duos would be milled out on both sides, whereas this was done, I believe, in 1940 to allow for simpler machining, less steps in the process. So, you know, this made it for easy. And this pistol does look like crap. I basically got it just for a demonstration piece for this video. I wasn't really looking for too high quality. You can tell the patina on there. I might take the, you know, dip this in some Croil oil and kerosene, or Croil oil and Hops 9, and hit it with some quadruple-aught steel wool at some point. But that's for a, that's a future endeavor. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this back together. Now, the grips definitely aren't a, they definitely aren't for field stripping. I just wanted to show you that. But let's go ahead and get those back on real quick, and then we will put the pistol back together. So instead of getting my time, he will fast forward to this. Alright, now that we got our grips back on, we want to put this back together. Let's make sure that our lugs are turned to the side, or else we're not going to be able to get that back on. I'm going to go ahead and stick this striker spring in there, because that spring will go in down there. We will want our mainspring and guide rod to go through that. And then to put that back on, you want that to go in there. So hopefully everything gets aimed in there correctly. There she goes. So we got to turn our barrel back. Turn our barrel back so it don't move. And there we go. It's a CZ Duo. Let's talk about the CZ45. If you like what you've seen so far, please leave me a like below. CZ's vz.45 is an update of their vz.36 pistol, which saw its genesis much earlier in the century with Alois Tomas's pistols. First, he patented what became the Little Tom in 1908, which would be produced through the Great War, and after as the rights were sold to Wiener Waffenfabrik in Vienna and by Tomaska himself in 1920s. He had also designed what became known as the Fox pistol, which originally had a folding trigger, but would be updated to a traditional trigger and trigger guard when Czechoslovakia formed in 1922. This pistol would become the VZ1922, not to be confused with the VZ22 I talked about in the VZ24 video that fired 380. The 25 ACP VZ1922 would be the first pistol to bear the CZ logo. A replacement was desired by the mid-1930s, and Franciszek Majska would take inspiration from Tomas's early pistol, the Little Tom, in creating the VZ36. This little guy was hammer-fired and double action only. After the Second World War, Jan Kratochvil, a name that would be very important for the CZ over the next quarter century, would replace the VZ36 and make it simpler to produce. He would eliminate the external safety and add a magazine safety. This would become the VZ45. Okay, we're going to talk about the CZ45 a little bit here. I went ahead and field stripped the Duo off camera just so we can make some comparisons here in a little bit. And then, of course, I got my Colt 1908 vest pocket up there as well as for comparison. So, to take this down, first off, we're going to make sure she is unloaded. This is actually a little bit easier since it's double action only. You don't have to worry about decocking it. So let's go ahead and pull our spring out. And since there is no safety on here, you actually just got to pull it back a little bit. Twist the barrel and it'll come right off. And you actually have a few less parts to worry about. You just got your spring guide rod and your barrel doesn't come out as well on this. And so anyway, here's a couple things I want to point out. This is striker fired. You got the spring there, whereas this is hammer fired, double action only. And one thing I want to point out about the barrel too, that this was they wanted to simplify that. You see it's just one big lug there instead of the 3 lugs there. So that, is definitely simpler to produce. This is 8 rounds. This holds 6. So that's another difference between the two. The barrel for the CZ45 or the VZ45 is 5 inches, whereas that's 4 1/3 inches. So, you have a little more barrel length, but then again, to me, that this will be easier to fire just because you have the striker fire, and that is double action only. All right, let's put this back together. Your barrel, you notice there's a little cutout right there. You kind of want that, and you want actually see through the ejection port there. You want to see that, or it looks flat there, to put it back together. The flat end goes to the back, but I always do this little test to make sure you can see the guide rod come through. Of course, you want the back end to fit in there. So let's see if we can't get her back together here. Everything back in its place. And then you can kind of look through there. Just see when you turn your barrel. And we are back together. Now, one thing about these, I'm sure CZ52s have been fairly cheap, and that's going to be a future video here. But I'm sure you've heard that on CZ52s, you don't want to dry fire them because of the firing pin. That's actually a fault on these as well. You do not want to dry fire this because your firing pin might be brittle. So anyway, let's talk a little bit more, finish out the history on the CZ45, and hear my opinions on shooting these things. Although government-controlled, CZ would survive as an entity after nationalization. The VZ45 would be produced at Strakonics until 1952, where production would move to other factories, including Dusek's former factory in Opochno. In 1961, production would be moved to Hyrský Brod. The little VZ45 would receive updates in 1970 and 1992, with the latter seeing a properly placed mag release along with a futuristic grip. Unfortunately for those of us in the U.S., the Gun Control Act in 1968 forbade imports of these pistols. Most of the VZ45s here are the original Strakonics variety.
Not very good from 10 yards out.
When it comes to shooting, I can only give the VZ45 a fair shake, as my Duo isn't in the best of shape, and malfunctioned with almost every shot. Still, from the few shots I did get, it felt very much like the 1908 Vest Pocket, and conditions being equal, I would likely prefer it since it doesn't have the grip safety. While the VZ45 feels more sturdy, the double action only makes it less accurate in my humble opinion. They both would make an excellent boot gun, although for me anyway, they aren't much good over 10 yards. This would definitely only be a good backup or very deep concealment solution. This gets us ready for Czechoslovak guns designed under communist rule, but if you need to catch up on the pre-war guns, click on the 2 videos below. Please join the GOA and get a discount with the code in the description. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.